which is a really major problem this time of year, and we're going to talk about that. This is through the Tristn Jevon Center for Recovery and in conjunction with the First United Methodist Church of Excelsior Springs. And I believe there are probably other Methodist churches out there watching on the live stream because we've kind of spammed the United Methodist universe with it. Our locations are at 704 Wallard Boulevard in Richmond, Missouri, or 10 Westtown Drive in Liberty, Missouri. And you can use the liferecoveryconsulting.org email to get a hold of me, or you can use robert@tjrecovery.org. Either way, I'm more than willing to answer questions, and I will be posting this again on both of the YouTube pages for our sponsors. This is our team right now. It just consists of me and Mason Lumpkins, who I supervise. When we get off the ground and we get enough money gathered up in scholarship funds, right now we're raising money to begin seeing our ideas to see people in rural areas who can't really afford mental health care at low or no cost. We don't go much of the no cost because the research indicates that if people have to pay a minimal $5 or $10 or $20, that they're at least invested in the outcome of their own counseling. But we're out there as a resource for trauma, addictions, and developmental disabilities, including autism. But right now, what I want to focus on is the kind of increase in stress and depression and suicide that many people deal with over the holidays. Stress factors might include family, finances. Certainly this time of year, we rack up a lot of bills over Christmas that we end up becoming depressed in January about having to pay for. Careers, especially right now, while the unemployment numbers are looking pretty good and people, it might go the other way in that if you're an employer, you have some considerable stress this time of year because you can't find employees. And then there are societal stressors, especially over the past year and a half, 2 years, with the COVID virus and the increasing politicization of silly things that continue to divide us instead of bringing us together in a time when we really need to find the strength of common ground. The societal stressors have been through the roof. And we're going to talk about how social media and the news and TV shows can play into those societal stressors, and how sometimes it's a really good idea to go on a media diet or even fast for a while, as in the Christian faith, even in the Muslim faith, in almost every faith, we talk about fasting as a discipline, but we don't just fast from food or water. We can also fast from social media and news outlets and things that are causing us stress and anxiety. There are a lot of other things that might be stressing it out. This time of year is particularly hard for my family. It's our first year without our son, who died February 4th. And so this is our first Christmas without him. Hello, Janita. Janita showed up. We don't have a lot of people here today, but we're going to continue on because this is going to be posted as a resource down the road for people to watch. Stress, then, these stress factors turn into anxiety at times. And we're going to talk about the mechanism that happens through the brain in just a minute, but understanding that stress becomes anxiety, and the pressure of that anxiety over time and that stress over time then can become a heavy burden and a depression. What is anxiety? So it can be generalized or it can be specific, right? So it can result from stress and trauma. I'm going to admit somebody on iPad here. Sorry, folks. Okay. Anxiety can be generalized or specific. It can result from stress or trauma, which means that daily stress we just talked about, especially this time of year, or the trauma of having lost someone. Our family is dealing with that now, dealing with the first Christmas, the first holiday season without a loved one. can be really stress, producing, anxiety producing. It can result in panic attacks. It may feel like either intense panic where you feel like you're having a heart attack, you can't breathe, you're going to die, or it could just be a low level discomfort and stress that you feel throughout the day where you're just like constantly on edge. But anxiety is almost always rooted in fear. It's rooted in the fear of what might be in the future, or it's rooted in the fear of what has been being again. So it is almost always then rooted in fear. The body reactions to that stress, then to that fear, are you have an increase in brain chemicals like cortisol and adrenaline and acetylcholines, and you end up with rapid breathing, rapid heart rate, a lot of muscle tension, sweating. And it's really, in the long term, it's horrible on your joints and muscles. So we really want to get a handle on that, because what we find out down the road is that this kind of stress and anxiety, these chemicals, create things like fibromyalgia and arthritis and heart disease and stroke and IBS and gastrointestinal problems. All these problems can be related back to the presence of high levels of cortisol in the body over long term. So phobias, OCD, other outward expressions, what we call hypervigilance, are all rooted often in that anxiety, in that stress-induced fear. And this is a season where, I said before, media and social media and general media have a lot to do with inducing fear in us, fear generally of what Brene Brown called the myths of scarcity, the not being enoughness, not being enough for the people around us at holidays, not being enough, having enough money, not having enough, whatever it is. I seem to be getting more and more people coming in. That's good. We're going to be live streaming. If you missed any of this, then we can absolutely re-see the rest of it when we go, when we go into YouTube. I'm trying to open the chat box so I can see the chat at the same time. So if you have any messages when we come to these little questions, slides, I'm going to stop and look at the chat box, see if there are any questions in there. If there are not, we'll go on. If you don't throw questions out, but later you're like me, later you're like, oh my God, I should have asked that, please feel free to either post the question on YouTube, where this is going to be posted in a few days, or simply email me at robert@tjrecovery.org. I like talking about this stuff. If I get to going too fast, throw that out in the chat box, because sometimes I get hyper about these things and I end up moving at the speed of a squirrel on drugs generally. So I have lots of grad students who are like, whoa, 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 slow that down for a little bit. Okay. So I want to go over the emotional brain a little bit, because when we talk about this, I want to show you how media and some of these other things, especially this time of year, trigger that feeling of scarcity, that feeling that I'm not enough in one way or another, and how it keeps us in a place that is not good for thinking and is high stress and is bad for us physically, but it makes us really good consumers. And it makes us really malleable as far as being able to feed us things that we will just believe. So you have something in your brain called the thalamus. That's the kidney-shaped thing in the middle of the picture there. And it kind of scans all of your sensory input. This is why I hate Black Friday, because my thalamus wants to trigger my amygdala all the time by telling me there's too many people, there's too much noise, I'm not safe, right? Because it feeds that data, all of the data it collects from all of your senses, what you see, smell, hear, taste, touch, all of that gets fed to two places, to the amygdala, which is a little pea-sized structure in your brain, and to the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for taking all that information and breaking it down. That takes about 4 or 5 seconds to decide if something is safe or not safe, or what to do about it. The amygdala says, if there's a tiger behind us, we don't have time for that. So in a 30th of that time, or about 0.2 seconds, The amygdala decides simply safe or unsafe. And if it sees anything that feels unsafe at all, it triggers. And if it triggers, it shuts off everything in the top part of your brain. So all the reasonable thinking is gone. Those of you who married and have arguments with your spouse know that once that argument gets to a certain point, you cannot talk to them anymore, because at that point, they're in the fear part of their brain. They're in the fight or flight part of their brain. Their cortisol is really high. You can see their anxiety and stress response. The muscles start to tense. The pupils might even narrow and get really, really focused. You have rapid breathing, rapid heart rate, might start sweating. So you have all these emotional, physical, and sensory triggers going on at the same time. This is where PTSD comes from. If someone walks into a situation and there is some sensory trigger there in the environment, whether it's a smell or a feeling or a sound that reminds them of a past trauma, they're gone, right? And this can be really bad for people during the holidays. I get dry when I talk this fast. So one client that I had actually was triggered by some Christmas ornaments. And because her trauma was so significant, she completely dissociated and ended up sitting in the middle of Walmart in the aisle playing with those Christmas ornaments, right? That was a complete dissociation into that trauma response. What we deal with often during the holidays is lesser, but it's still there and it's still bad for us. And it still puts us on edge all the time, makes us feel less than. Shame becomes very common. We see an incredible increase in addiction as a coping mechanism during the holidays. It can be really hard. So I want to talk a little more about anxiety, stress, and depression and how those three things are related. We talked about prolonged stress can and does then result in anxiety responses at times, because those prolonged stressors then begin to trigger that midbrain and keep me trapped in there, and I can't rationally think my way out of that at times. Then prolonged anxiety, being too long in this, can result in depression, because my system becomes used to high levels of bad chemicals, and those chemicals begin to reduce the good chemicals like the oxytocin and the dopamines and the serotonins. And so I end up with a lack of those good chemicals, and that can start the depressive cycle. So good chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin go down, while the harmful chemicals go up, like the cortisols and the ones that make me breathe faster and feel stressful all the time. And I'm just ready to snap at my family over the littlest things. And then I go, wow, where did that even come from? So prolonged decreased levels then of these good chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin begin to starve the brain and cause depression. It becomes a cycle. And this is where some medications from your doctor can really help out if this becomes deep enough. There's the examples that we're going to use today are to help us try and not get that far down the road. But if you find that you can't get out of bed, that it's just harder and harder to face every day as we go into the holidays, then you really need to see someone about that, and possibly a doctor. Depression can be brief episodes, but they can also be chronic and last years, or they can manifest periodically as very deep depressive states. So it's possible that this becomes a periodic thing that I experience during holidays for whatever reason. And part of that reason could be the stress and anxiety that I'm feeling over the holidays. So medications like the SSRIs, SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And what that means is you have these little vacuums in your brain that keep you from having too much like dopamine, too much serotonin, because too much can also be a bad thing and cause my body serious problems. And so the little vacuums go around and they suck out the excess serotonin and they get rid of it. So the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors just stop those vacuums from working to try and keep the serotonin that you're producing in your body for longer periods. I want to go with the signs and symptoms, and then we're going to talk about like one of the things that I like to suggest to people that they begin doing in order to try and fight that cycle before it gets too deep to where I do need medication, and maybe even then the medication's not working very well for me. So signs and symptoms of depression can be difficulty concentrating and making decisions. I can tell you that after our son died, there were probably 3 months where I don't remember most of that 3 months. I was completely dissociated from it and making decisions. I relied completely on Mason to run the company, and or largely on him, and wasn't able to do a lot of work myself. Fatigue and decreased energy. You just don't feel like you can do anything. You're constantly tired. Feelings of guilt, worthlessness, helplessness, what I call toxic shame, right? Guilt is actually not a bad thing. It can be a healthy thing. It can be a thing that says, I did something bad. I need to make amends for that. I need to make that right. Guilt says I did something bad, and toxic shame says I am something bad. So that's the fundamental difference there. Feelings of hopelessness and or pessimism. I call this Eeyore syndrome. Gosh, it's a nice day, Eeyore. Yeah, but it's probably going to rain. That's Eeyore. He was chronically depressed. Insomnia, early morning wakefulness, or excessive sleeping. So either I get up and I can't get back to sleep, or I can't get to sleep in the first place. Disturbances in sleep patterns can be a real indicator of depression, and also be a trigger for recurrent episodes of depression. Sleep is really, really important. Irritability, restlessness, right? Loss of interest in activities or hobbies that once were found pleasurable. So things that I used to want to do, I don't want to do anymore. I don't want to go hiking anymore in the woods, which is like one of my favorite things. I don't go out in the wood shop anymore and work on projects, which is like one of my favorite things. I lose interest in doing these things and choose instead to just sit around and binge on Netflix and eat bonbons all day. Okay. Changes in appetite, either binge eating or starving yourself. Changes in appetite where I don't feel like eating, or I feel like eating all the time because I feel like numbing out. Persistent aches or pains when you focus more. I live with chronic pain in my knees, but most of the time I don't focus on it. When I'm persistent about focusing on it, then I know there's some other thing going on up here, right? It becomes more obvious whenever I'm feeling depressed or down. Persistent sad, anxious, or empty feelings. Thoughts or even attempts of suicide. And here's the thing, if you feel someone in your family, and this is something I really wanted to get out there, could be thinking about suicide. There's a lot of talk about, I didn't want to mention it because I didn't want to put that idea in their head. If that idea is in their head, it's already in their head, and you need to know that. You need to get them help. Don't ever be afraid to ask someone, have you been depressed? Are you thinking about harming yourself? Have you thought about suicide? Did you have a plan? Don't be afraid to have these conversations, because nobody ever says after a completed suicide, I wish I hadn't had that conversation. Lots of people say, I wish I had had that conversation. Suicide rates are the highest through this holiday period from Thanksgiving to Christmas. And a lot of that is those expectations that we go into that we're going to talk about in a minute, but that really can lead us down the rabbit hole. Any questions at this point? I'm going to go ahead and put the chat in. And look, I don't see questions at this point. Okay, next session. And we may go through this pretty quick. Means of reducing stress. The first is to really free yourself from expectations. So I think that so much of holiday stress, holiday anxiety is about expectations. Especially if you have young kids, their expectations are huge, and then you feed into feeling like you're not a good parent if you're not meeting their expectations. But honestly, I remember one time Carrie Ann wanted a Barbie kitchen set, and man, the biggest lie I ever told was easy to assemble, right? And so I'm up late at night trying to assemble this stupid thing, and we get it together, and she has more fun in the box. It was all about my expectations, right? Reduce consumption of social media and news. And here's why. And I don't feel this is like an evil conspiracy or anything. I just think it's kind of like food companies recognized if we put high fructose corn syrup in everything, people like it more, right? They didn't start out, I don't think, thinking this is addictive. We can get people addicted. I think they just noticed this does better. The news has noticed, social media has noticed that you pay more attention if the news is scary, if they're talking about ways that you could be harmed. And the reason, it's really that you're not paying as much attention, it's that you're paying more attention that's uncritical attention. And what I mean by that is we've dropped down in this part of our brain when we're frightened by something. What in your household could be killing your kids? Stay tuned for the 10 o'clock news. Well, I'm not changing over because I want to know what might kill my kids in my home, right? And so this is where if it bleeds, it leads comes from, because it triggers this part of your brain. It gets you to stay tuned and it makes you a better consumer. So they're getting better ratings through the commercials and then they can market that better. I don't think that's a big evil plot or that there's any Simon Legree sitting in the background, wringing his hands saying, this is what we can do. I think it simply worked that way for them and they never questioned why. And even when they started to realize why, because the science is out there now, they didn't care. They needed the numbers. So learning to say no to those things and turn those things off. The other thing I talk about in expectations is with learning to say no is learning to set boundaries. Can you do this for me? It is okay to say no. People who really love and care about you will understand. I just don't have time for that this season. I'm so swamped. People who are going to buck your boundaries are generally the people who need the boundaries. And so I'm very, very pro boundary during holiday seasons. Like, no, I can't, with family members, especially families can get so difficult that no, I just can't. I'm going to come and I'm going to meet you for this time slot. I've told many, many patients this who had problems with family, but felt obligated to be there. Set a boundary, not just for your family, but for you. Okay, I'm going to pop in. I'm going to stay no more than an hour or 2 hours, and then I'm going to pop out because that feels survivable to me. I actually had a client say that, follow through on it, and felt much better. And his holiday went much, much better after he got home and was able to have a holiday with his wife instead of being all escalated by what had happened with the extended family in that space. Set a self-care routine. This sounds so silly, but it is so important. Self-care, self-care, self-care. We have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of other people. There is a reason on an airplane that the oxygen mask falls down and it says, put it on your face first and then on the kids. Because if you're not awake or conscious, you can't help them. And in the same way, we have to stay stable in our own brains and keep ourselves up here in regulated space, keep ourselves calm, do the self-care things that we know helps us regulate so that we can be there when people need us to be. Guard your energy. So a lot of people out there deal with memory problems and dementia and things like this. And when you're dealing with dementia, you deal with something called sundowning, which means at the end of the day, it gets worse. They start to lose track more of things. The reason is that they run out of energy through the day. Your brain requires more energy than anything else in your body to run. It takes a huge amount of chemical energy to keep your brain going. So guard your energy means make sure you're getting enough sleep, make sure you're doing the self-care routine, make sure you're feeding yourself enough protein and the good foods in order to keep that body energy going so your brain has enough energy. It's almost like we get a certain allotted amount of energy every day. And if we don't add to that, then by the time the sun goes down, if you have these other mental issues going on, whether it's autism or developmental disabilities or mental illness or dementia, what I see is that as time goes on through the day, you have fought your own brain so much to try to make sense of the world that you have simply run out of energy. And then the sundowning starts, and then the mental illness gets worse, and then the paranoia gets worse, and then, right, the depression gets worse. So guard your energy. Take time to connect. One of the things we know is that our brain was designed for connection. It's really interesting because there are studies that show that if I am in conversation with someone and it's a two-way conversation and we're both enjoying it, certain parts of the brain light up. Those same parts, those connection parts of the brain also light up when I'm practicing mindfulness or prayer or yoga. It's almost as if, coming from a Christian perspective, it's almost as if what Christ said was really true, that where two or more of you gather, I'm there too. When you are in connection with each other, in deep connection with each other, and the oxytocin, the bonding chemical, is flowing well, then we have these almost divine moments. We've all walked away from conversations and thought, wow, that was just great. I wish I could have conversations with somebody like that every day. It just made me feel so connected, right? Exercise becomes really, really important. And as much as you can, do what you can when you can. Right now, my knees are shot. I can't walk a lot like I used to enjoy. So I have some chair exercises that I do to try to keep going now. And I've increased those by getting a little toy for Christmas. That was my excuse, that allows me to do some exercises in a chair that keeps my heart rate up and keeps me. And when I get my knees replaced in the spring, I hope to be able to do more of the going back to walking and stuff. It's really important though. My wife goes every day to aqua aerobics at the local community center. If she misses a day, she hates it. She hates it. The first month of doing that, she had to drag herself out of bed and drag herself there. But now she was told the other day, because of a procedure she had done, she couldn't be in the water for a week. And she was really angry about that. So sleep routines are important. Caffeine control is important. For me, caffeine control means I better have 3 cups before 10 a.m. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about not drinking caffeine throughout the day, all day, especially before bed, because that has a real stress component to it. There is one other thing that I wanted to say, and I don't think that Pastor Laura made it tonight, and that's a good thing because she would argue with me on this point. And that is that I think we should try to, in addition to going on a diet from social media and from the news during the holidays, I think we also should go on a diet from the Hallmark Channel because I think it sets up expectations, right? And that's kind of a joke and it's kind of not. And I told her, I think the Hallmark Channel was invented by the devil, but that's kind of a joke and it's kind of not. Because what it is it's a media platform meant to sell all of these great things. Well, if my holiday is not going perfect, here's the expectation, right? Then maybe it's because my house doesn't look this way and I can go to Hallmark and buy these things and make my house look this way, right? It sets up unrealistic expectations. I tell people all the time, no, there is no hot bachelor that's going to show up on your doorstep on Christmas Eve with a puppy in his arms. That's not going to happen. If you can exist in the holidays with that expectation, knowing that's probably not going to happen, your holiday will go much better. If you can get through the holidays understanding this is not the year that Uncle Frank's going to show up sober and everything's going to be happy, it's not going to be that kind of year, but it can be a happy experience being around my family. I just have to know that Uncle Frank is probably going to pass out in the potatoes like he has every other year. And I have to be willing to either deal with that or set a boundary for myself that I walk out at that point. And that's how we manage expectations and set ourselves free from the disappointment of those expectant attachments, is what I would call them. So one of the big tools I use this time of year is mindfulness. And there's a difference between mindfulness and meditation. Meditation is often focusing on some I would liken meditation more to prayer, where I specifically am focused on something, whereas mindfulness is just being aware of whatever comes. Mindfulness then is used to get in touch with our body states. To just kind of be like, there's this great app out there called the Chill app, and it's free, and it goes off 3 or 4 times a day, and it bings on your watch or your phone, and it just says things like, can you feel your feet on the ground for just the next 30 seconds? Or can you feel the air going in and out of your lungs? Or what thoughts are going round and round in your head at this moment? It's a way of bringing us back to our current moment and our current existence, which is incredibly important. That at its heart is mindfulness. The other thing that does, that process then begins to key us into, oh, I'm feeling really tense in my shoulders today. I wonder what that's about. So it begins to make us aware of those early signs of stress and anxiety as they're exhibited in the body. So I joke sometimes that my children lived as long as they did because I could feel the stress build up in my shoulders and go, oh. And when she was about 12 or 13 and learning to speak more for herself, Carrie Ann would even say to me, Dad, you're getting really salty. You need to go spend some time in the woods, right? And she was generally right about that. She could see that I was tensing up in my body and becoming stressed. Learning to ground ourselves then is the way out of this. We become the observer of our own body sensations and our own emotions in that way. And we're able to have a more detached attention. So by detached attention, I mean that I notice what's happening in my body, but I don't let the attention of the feelings that come up as a result of that take me over. I don't let the feelings then own me. I stay detached from them. I'm like, I'm feeling today was a rough day for us. I'm feeling really sad about Tristn today. You know, I don't have to let that own me. I can pay attention to it in a detached way and just be in that state. Part of that is that when I begin to notice that stress or that emotion, I start automatically regulating my breathing. And that keeps me again in the upstairs part of my brain, the thinking part of my brain. I begin regulating my breathing, just there's the square breathing. There's the, 4, 7, 8, 4 breathing, which is breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 7 seconds, breathe out for 8 seconds, and then hold for 4 seconds and just keep doing that. Now, what that does is it brings attention to the breathing. I have a much easier method that's like too much. I couldn't even hardly remember it sitting here trying to recall it. So that can be too much. I have a simpler method that I'm going to talk about in a minute. What happens when we begin doing this is that there's this mind-body connection that starts, right? If we've had trauma in our lives, if we're having stress, what a lot of us do is we separate our mind and body. We tend to dissociate from what's going on physically with us in the world. We tend to like pretend it doesn't exist. And I'm not going to go too deep into this. This is written originally for people who are into psychology and stuff, but there's a nerve right here at the base of your brain that goes around and interacts with all of the organs in your body called the vagus, right? And what we know now is that the stress that gets transferred along that vagus back and forth causes a lot of illnesses. We talked about things like fibromyalgia and Crohn's disease and IBS, especially IBS. That's a very anxiety and stress related illness. One of the things that's really helpful is yoga, because you have that body-brain connection again, or Tai Chi, or anything like that, where you're very aware of what you're doing with every movement of your body. Then you're integrating the brain and the body again. And what we see in these mindfulness practices and things like yoga and Tai Chi is an actual increase in our neural pathways. Now, we don't grow necessarily new neurons doing this, although there's some evidence that we can do that. It's a different process. What we do is break apart old anxiety and stress associations and then begin growing new connections between more positive regulation. So what that means in English is, if I was in Afghanistan and in combat and I come home and every time 4th of July comes around, I'm just like wired with anxiety and fear because of the noise. I can, with mindfulness and some of this brain training, begin breaking apart the association of loud bang and danger and start reforming new neural pathways that associate that noise with 4th of July or people enjoying themselves, and it actually improves the PTSD. Okay, by strengthening those new connections, right? We also improve like the pruning process in the brain. Your brain like begins pruning away these old connections that it doesn't use as much. And because it does that, we don't have to go through as many connections to make decisions. So we see an increase in something in executive function, which is the ability to choose between 5 or 6 items or go from one task to another task smoothly without a lot of problem, or the ability to release. I have problems with executive functioning sometimes. And my wife knows now that if she wants me to like release what I'm doing, whether that's on the computer or I'm reading a book or I'm even watching a show that I'm really into, she needs to tap me on the shoulder and give me a second so that I can release that activity and move and give her my full attention. That's an executive functioning issue, right? Also, mindfulness causes an increase in all those really positive chemicals like oxytocin, cortisol, serotonin, right? We see an increase in those chemicals to the brain. This is mindfulness I have become absolutely sold on is one of the most powerful things we can do to change our lives. So the basic exercise in releasing anxiety anytime I start feeling it is what I call the 3 things activity. It's just 2 breaths in, and then looking around and saying to myself quietly 3 things I can see. I can see my drinking mug, I can see my computer, I can see a lamp. And then 2 more breaths. And then 3 things I can hear. I can hear the ringing in my ears a little bit. I can hear my computer fan, and I can hear the washing machine going downstairs below me. And then 2 more breaths. Now in session, a lot of times I'll notice that I am triggering a client's anxiety because we talk about difficult things sometimes. And so we'll stop right there in the middle of session and we'll do that exercise and I'll say, now, how do you feel? And they're much relaxed and they can stay engaged in our conversation then instead of dissociating from it. That's a really simple activity. And the reason it works is because of what we said before. Anxiety is always the fear of what might be in the future or what has been in the past. And this exercise grounds you in the here and now of this moment. And that is a safe space, unless there's a tiger behind you and then you have other issues. But that should be a safe space, right? And so if I can use that grounding exercise, what I'm doing is forcing my brain to recognize that I'm in a safe space around me, no matter what my senses and my body are telling me. Okay. We're going to do a basic exercise in listening to breath. I'm going to look and see if I have any questions or not. I don't. So this is going to be just a few minutes. It's scheduled as a 20-minute exercise, but that's going to put us considerably over time. And when I usually give this, it's usually a 2-hour lecture instead of 1. So this will give you an idea, though, for the next 5 minutes of what a good mindfulness exercise might be like and how relaxing it can be. Whoops, sorry. And you should be able to hear this as I play it. This mindfulness meditation
is going to take us to the northern woods, perhaps Michigan, Minnesota. We're going to start with a few regulated breaths, and the music begins. Remember to breathe in through your nose. 2, 3. Hold for a count of 2, and then breathe out through your mouth. 3, 2, 1. And as we listen to the music in the background, we can feel ourselves relax. We feel ourselves sink deeper and deeper into the chair, the couch, the bed that we're sitting on. And as we breathe out, 3, 2, 1, we feel any tension that remains in our body releasing into the ground below us as we sink deeper and further into the meditation. As we listen to the river behind us, you can hear quietly the sounds of the loon in the northern woods. What do we see? Can we see the waterfalls flowing past a tree? And we see the river carrying our anxiety away, and we just relax further and sink deeper into this meditation as we listen to the quiet singing of the loon, quiet chirping of the crickets in the background. Perhaps we can smell the soft ground beneath us and feel it absorbing our anxieties. And so we sit quietly for the next 15 minutes and just allow ourselves to explore this world, this northern wooded river. Just take time to notice the things around you and let the calm of the northern woods soak into you and continue sinking deeper, paying only attention to the peace that these woods offer you and allowing that to soak into your soul.
Okay, so that was just about 4 or 5 minutes there of that experience, and it's a 20-minute exercise. What I'll do is, if you enjoyed it, I'll put a link to it underneath when I post the YouTube. Just watch our page, tjrecovery.org, or the Facebook page would probably be better. I'll post it on Facebook. Both on the church's page, I'll post a link to this YouTube link, and to our page at the Tristn Jevon Center. on Facebook. And then you'll be able to watch this video again if you need to. If I went through too fast through parts, you'll be able to contact me through those pages and leave questions if you need to do that. Any experiences that anybody wants to discuss? It's interesting because sometimes I'll do a meditation where it's just the music and I'm not guiding any meditative experience or anything in there, and it's just the music and focusing on the body and relaxing. And you'd be surprised how many therapists I even have who, in, you know, crowds of 30, 40, 50, I'll always get 4 or 5 who will say that was a horrible experience. I hated every minute of that, because they haven't learned, you know, how to sit still with themselves for 5 minutes and just be quiet. And they're constantly doing what we call, you know, playing whack-a-mole, trying to squash my thoughts instead of just letting them come and go and drift and be and just noticing them. Okay, I'm glad you're enjoying it so far, Janita. And we're getting ready to wrap up here. But the point that I want to make here is really take your needs seriously through the holiday. Focus on what you need. Take some time to stop and not just think about what you need on a logical level, but think about what you feel and what you feel you need and what you're feeling inside. It's okay to be stressed out. It doesn't mean that you hate your family, right? I love my family, but I learned that 7 days was a long enough vacation, because on the 8th day, I was driving home thinking, I really do not like these people anymore, right? And so you know, it's okay to have emotions that aren't positive. We don't have to constantly, and I think that's another pressure of the holidays, is that we're supposed to be happy, happy, joy, joy all the time. And that's not natural for anyone. So allow yourself to be whatever state you find yourself in, and just take care of you in that place, because that's the only way you're going to be able to take care of other people in that place. So I'll talk about that emotional regulation and the brain, that the point of mindfulness is not to control my thoughts and emotions. I can't do that. I'm going to have thoughts come up. You know, the Apostle Paul said, when you have negative thoughts come up, think on the good things. But he wouldn't have said that if we could have controlled the negative thoughts to begin with. They come up. Thoughts are thoughts. Emotions are emotions. They're just going to come up on us because we're human and we can't stop them. The point of mindfulness is to keep thoughts and emotions from controlling me. They don't have to determine my behavior. If I stay aware of them and I recognize them and I say, there's that feeling, I wonder where that's coming from, and I take the time to process that, it doesn't control my behavior. See, most anger is rooted in fear or rooted in hurt. We don't like either one of those feelings. We don't like to be hurt and we don't like to be afraid. And so we'll just be angry instead, because anger is more acceptable. And if we have not been raised in a world, and this is not a world that's going to raise us that way, to understand emotion and that it is okay, then we may become afraid of those emotions very easily. The number one thing I tell parents, whether it's parents of kids with developmental disabilities or parents of quote neurotypical kids, is be willing to recognize, reflect, and normalize emotion. So when your child gets angry and throws things, you don't say, don't you do that. You say, well, you know, you're really angry. Now, that doesn't mean I don't go on to say to the child later, you don't get to throw things when you get angry, though. We have to decide a better way. It's okay to have that emotion. It's not okay to let that emotion control me. And so this is the difference that mindfulness, I think, can bring us to, is teaching us that I cannot stop thoughts and emotions, but they don't have to control my behaviors. Becoming the observer of my thoughts and emotions is moving away from the attachment to them. Someone cuts me off in traffic. I get attached to that feeling of, you could have hurt me. I take it very personally. I begin to get angry, and then road rage ensues. Or someone cuts me off in traffic and I can think, well, that was kind of an idiotic thing to do, but I don't have to attach to that fear that it's generated inside of me. And then I don't have to go into road rage mode. So we call these thoughts and emotions that run at random in our brain as we're trying to be quiet. Generally, it's like when you're ready to go to bed that you start thinking about all the bills that are due and stuff. We call that monkey mind. When you're trying to just settle down and be quiet and just be in that space and your mind won't stop going, we call that monkey mind. And I like to put those little monkeys over in a corner and not get too attached to them. And then once I've got them to quiet down, I'll reach over and grab one of them and say, why are you here? Why am I stressing about this? What do I need to learn from this particular thought or feeling or emotion? What's it trying to tell me? So this is all about practice, though. Contemplative prayer, meditation begins shaping the brain, but it needs to be a practice, just like going to the gym. I had a client one time on the spectrum. He's really into working out, really muscle bound, goes to the gym every day. And he said, I tried mindfulness once last week. It really didn't work for me. I said, you know what? I know what you mean. Wednesday, I went to the gym and I haven't lost a pound yet. And he started laughing. And I said, why is that funny? And he said, because you don't just go to the gym once and lose weight. I said, you don't just do mindfulness once and it changes your world. You have to practice. So it's a process of becoming aware of the body processes that are going on, being alert to triggers as they come up. What is it that's making me feel this way? And then eventually it becomes second nature. I tell people a really good time to practice is around mealtime, like right after breakfast, I'm going to do 10 minutes of meditation or mindfulness. Right after lunch, I'm going to take 10 minutes. Right after dinner, I'm going to take 10 minutes. And then having that chill app to make me aware through the day of what's going on in me in any given moment. Right? This is the practice that we want to cultivate. Brother Lawrence talked about praying incessantly. He talked about being in constant prayer, constant contact, constant communication with his creator, which ultimately I think is the goal, but it's nearly impossible to achieve that, or at least it has been for me over 30 years of practice. But that doesn't stop me from wanting to be there. And by wanting to be there and by practicing more and more, I have become much and greatly improved at being able to stay in that space. So this is the other thing I want to say before we leave, and that is a lesson in brokenness. We're all so afraid of admitting that we're broken during the holidays, but understand that brokenness was the plan from the beginning. I don't believe in a creator who would say to someone, don't go take a bite of that apple. Being omniscient, they already know what's going to happen. They already know what that's going to result in, right? So what was the reason for that? The reason is that brokenness was intended. And Rumi says it great in this little short quip from a poem of his. Rumi always talks about having conversations with God as he's walking through the woods or along the beach or somewhere. And God wakes him up in the morning and he has a conversation with him. And I just love that about his poetry. And in this one, God says, what about your eyes? I said, what about my eyes? What do I do with my eyes? And God said, keep them on the road. And I said, what about my passion? God said, keep it burning. And I said, what about my heart? What do I do with my heart? And God said, tell me what you hold inside it. And I said, pain and sorrow. And God said, stick with it. The wound is the place where my light enters you. Brokenness was intended because brokenness creates need, and need creates connection, and connection is what it's all about. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this today. I think we're about out of time. If you have any questions that I haven't been able to answer, please do. Just feel free to email me, robert@tjrecovery.org is probably the best way to get a hold of me. We are trying to fundraise for our scholarship fund. You can also use liferecoveryconsulting.com. I'll get that too. We're trying to raise for the scholarship fund. You can go to our website, tjrecovery.org, and find out more about that. We're trying to provide services for people with low income. We have a sliding scale that we've devised based on the poverty level and income. That's pretty much the same one that Tri-County and a lot of other places use. And we're going to be posting that in the next few weeks, certainly before the end of the year. So if there are any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I've enjoyed having you all